In the autumn of 1440, the people of Na gathered to witness an execution that would haunt France for centuries. The condemned man was no common criminal. He was Gilles de Rais, Baron of Brittany, Marshal of France, companion in arms to Joan of Arc, and one of the wealthiest nobles in the kingdom. Behind the stone walls of his castles at Tiphoses and Machecoul, investigators had uncovered evidence of systematic atrocities so horrifying that even hardened soldiers struggled to document them. The trial records would later reveal that over a span of nearly 8 years, dozens of children had vanished into those fortress chambers, never to emerge alive. What transforms a celebrated war hero into a methodical killer remains one of history's darkest questions. The same hands that once wielded a sword for France alongside the Maid of Orleans had orchestrated acts that the presiding bishop called more cruel than any Tsar or barbarian. As the prosecution presented their evidence, castle servants testified to scenes they had witnessed, describing systematic brutality conducted with the precision of a military campaign. The court chronicler Jean Chartier would write that the testimonies caused such horror among those present that many could not bear to remain in the chamber. The rise of Gilles d'Ais, nobleman turned war hero. Born in 1405 to one of Britain's most powerful families, Gilles d'Ais inherited vast estates before his 16th birthday. His grandfather, Jean d'Arion, molded the young nobleman into a formidable military commander, teaching him the arts of war and statecraft. By his early 20s, Gilles commanded his own forces, demonstrating tactical skill that caught the attention of the French crown. His wealth was staggering. Contemporary records indicate he controlled over 15 major castles and fortresses across Brittany and Anjou, along with lands that generated enormous annual revenues. In 1427, Gilles entered the service of the Dauphin's Shell, the uncrowned king struggling to reclaim France from English occupation. When a peasant girl named Jean arrived at Chinon, claiming divine guidance, Gilles was among the commanders assigned to her army. He fought at her side during the relief of Orleans in May 1429, leading cavalry charges that broke the English siege. Witnesses described him as fearless in combat, his blue and gold banner visible at the front of every assault. The coronation of Charles Roman II at Rheims Cathedral in July 1429 marked the pinnacle of Gilles' military glory. The king elevated him to Marshal of France, one of the highest military honors in the realm. He was 24 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and celebrated as a hero throughout the kingdom. When Joan of Arc was captured by Burgundian forces in 1430, Gilles withdrew from active campaigning. The chronicler Percel de Cangy noted that after John's execution in Rouen, the Baron d'Arras returned to his estates and was not seen again at court for many years. Togua and Machecoul castles converted into chambers of captivity. Gilles established his primary residences at 2 fortresses in the Lewis region. Tiphoses Castle, perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking the Sea-Nance River, was a formidable structure with walls nearly 3 m thick. The castle featured multiple towers connected by narrow corridors and a complex of underground chambers originally built for storage and defense. Machecoul Castle, located 40 km to the west, was equally imposing with fortified gates and a layout that allowed complete isolation of the interior rooms from outside observation. Between 1432 and 1440, Gilles transformed these castles into something far different from typical noble residences. He dismissed most of his hereditary household staff, replacing them with handpicked servants bound to him by wages rather than feudal obligation. The Italian mercenary Henriette Gray and the cleric Francois Priady became his closest confidants, managing the daily operations of both castles. Gilles established strict protocols. Certain chambers were declared off-limits to all but his inner circle. Servants were forbidden from entering the tower rooms without express permission, and castle guards were instructed to prevent unauthorized access to specific corridors. The isolation of these fortresses served Gilles's purposes well. Both Taifs and Machical stood distant from major population centers, surrounded by forests and agricultural lands, where his authority was absolute. Local families depended on the Baron for employment and protection. When children began disappearing from nearby villages, parents hesitated to voice suspicions about their overlord. According to trial testimony, Gilles' servants would recruit victims by offering employment as pages or servants in the castle, promising families that their children would receive education and advancement in the Baron's household. Witnesses later described a systematic process of procurement. Gilles' agents, particularly a woman named Lamefree, known in local villages as a procurer of household staff, would approach impoverished families with offers of positions for young boys. Parents were told their children would learn courtly manners and perhaps secure future positions in noble households. The children would be escorted to either Tifo or Machical, ushered through the main gates in daylight, and then led to the restricted tower chambers where Zille waited. Once inside those rooms, they would never leave the castle alive. Torture methods inside the castle chambers of Gilles de Rais. The trial of Gilles Dur in October 1040 produced testimony from his former servants that revealed the systematic nature of his crimes. The prosecution's case rested heavily on depositions from Oriad Green Corillo, known as Puatu, and other members of the household who had participated in or witnessed the atrocities. These men described a pattern that had continued for years. Children brought to the castles were taken to specific chambers in the towers, rooms that Jesus had equipped for his purposes. The depositions detailed acts of extreme violence, conducted in a methodical, almost ritualistic manner. Henriette Gray testified that Gilles employed various methods of inflicting suffering before ending the lives of his victims. Binding and elevating them within the chambers was described as a common practice, leaving victims helpless, while Gilles proceeded with further torments. The servants stated that Gilles would often spend extended periods with his victims, sometimes entire afternoons before their deaths. The trial records indicate that suffocation was frequently used as the final method of execution, though victims were subjected to extensive brutality before that point. These sessions took place in the upper chambers of the castle towers, rooms that could be secured and isolated from the rest of the household. The testimony revealed that Gilles maintained specific implements in these chambers. Iron hooks, cords, and various restraining devices were kept ready. According to Puatu's deposition, Gilles would personally select tools before summoning a victim to the chamber. The servants described their role as assisting in the restraint and disposal of bodies afterward. They testified that Gilles showed no remorse during or after these acts, treating them as regular occurrences within the castle routine. One witness stated that Jess once remarked, "He derived greater pleasure from these deaths than from any worldly honor or victory in battle." The disposal of remains presented a logistical challenge that the household managed with disturbing efficiency. Bodies were initially concealed within the castles, hidden in chests or storage chambers. Later, under cover of darkness, servants would transport them to various locations. Some were burned in the large castle fireplaces, reduced to ash that could be scattered. Others were buried in unmarked locations throughout the castle grounds or in nearby fields under G control. Trial testimony indicated that castle chimneys sometimes emitted unusual smoke late at night, and servants described the smell of burning that would permeate certain sections of the fortresses. The scale gradually became apparent during the investigation. When authorities finally searched Taifs and Machical in September 1440, they discovered physical evidence that corroborated servant testimony. Bone fragments were found in ash pits near the great fireplaces. Stains that could not be fully scrubbed from stone floors told their own story. The examining magistrates documented locations where earth had been recently disturbed, suggesting burial sites throughout the castle grounds. Contemporary records suggest the victims numbered between 40 and 200 children, though the exact count remains uncertain. The trial focused on charges related to approximately 40 specific cases, where witnesses could provide names, dates, and details of disappearances. Jean Jottier wrote that the number of innocents who perished in those chambers exceeds what any man could bear to chronicle. The systematic nature of the crimes conducted over nearly a decade within the security of Gilles's own fortifications suggested a mind that had transformed military discipline and organizational skills toward purposes of unfathomable cruelty. The fall and execution of Gilles de Rais at Nantes. Gilles's downfall began not with the child murders, but with a separate act of violence that gave authorities jurisdiction to investigate him. In May 1440, he seized a cleric named Jean Lefferin during a dispute over property rights, dragging him from a church in the town of Saint-Jean-de-Mort. This violation of ecclesiastical sanctuary provided the Bishop of Nogent de Malisto with legal grounds to bring charges against the Baron. Once investigation began, rumors that had circulated for years about missing children suddenly found official ears willing to listen. The bishop appointed a commission to examine the allegations. Investigators traveled to villages surrounding Tifos and Machicoul, collecting testimony from parents whose children had vanished after being recruited for service in Gilles's household. The pattern emerged with damning clarity. Boys between 7 and 15 years old had been taken to the castles and never seen again. Families had been told their children had run away or died of illness, but no bodies were ever returned for burial. When investigators presented this evidence to Duke Jean V of Brittany, the secular authority joined the church prosecution. In September 1440, ducal forces surrounded Tifa Castle and arrested Gilles de Rais. Simultaneously, officers secured Machicoul and detained members of his household. The Baron was transported to Nantes and imprisoned in the Terre-Neuve, a fortress tower overlooking the Loire. The trial began on October 8th before an ecclesiastical court presided by Bishop Malesroit, with secular charges to be heard afterward by Pierre d'Hopital, president of the Brittany Parliament. Initially, Gilles maintained his aristocratic dignity, refusing to acknowledge the court's authority over a marshal of France. When the formal charges were read listing homicide, depraved acts, heresy, and violation of church immunity, he declared the proceedings invalid. The judges responded by threatening excommunication, which would damn his soul eternally. This broke Gilles's resistance. On October 21st, he confessed publicly in open court, describing his crimes in detail that shocked even the experienced jurists present. The trial transcript records that he wept while confessing, claiming he had been driven by unnatural desires he could not control. His closest servants, already under torture, corroborated his confession with their own testimony. Henriette and Poitou described specific incidents, naming victims and explaining the methods Gilles had employed. The court heard how the Baron had justified his actions by claiming the children meant nothing, that their low birth made them expendable. He admitted to personally taking the lives of many of the victims, describing how he had engaged in unsettling physical contact before they perished. The bishop's notary struggled to record the testimony, later writing that such evil seemed beyond human capacity. Yet the Baron confessed it all without hesitation once his resistance was broken. The verdict was pronounced on October 25th, 1440. Gilles D. was found guilty of murder, inappropriate conduct, heresy, and violating the sanctity of the Church. The sentence decreed death by hanging, followed by burning of the body. However, because Gilles had confessed and shown apparent contrition, the court granted him the mercy of Christian burial afterward, a significant concession given the severity of his crimes. His servants Henriette and Pooh received the same sentence without the promise of burial, as their lower status afforded them less consideration. The execution took place on October 26th in a meadow outside now called the Prairie de la Madeleine. A large crowd gathered, including many parents of the vanished children. 3 gallows had been erected. Gilles was dressed in white robes, a symbol of penitence. Before mounting the scaffold, he addressed the assembled people, urging parents to raise their children with discipline and keep them away from bad influences. He was hanged alongside Henriette and Poitou at midday. According to witnesses, Gilles died quickly, the sentence carried out with immediate finality. His body was cut down before the flames could consume it, honoring the promise of burial. The servants' bodies were left to burn completely, their ashes scattered. Gilles de Rais was interred in the Carmelite church in Nantes. The Duke ordered both Tifos and Machical castles' most notorious chambers sealed, though neither fortress was demolished. They stood as monuments to how thoroughly evil could flourish behind walls of privilege and power. In the years following his execution, Gilles de became a cautionary figure in French culture. His story, retold as a warning about unchecked aristocratic authority and moral corruption. Some later writers would speculate about his motives, attempting to explain how a celebrated war hero descended into systematic murder. The trial records offer no satisfying psychological insight, only the documented fact of what occurred within those castle chambers and the 40 or more young lives extinguished there. The question that haunted France then still resonates today. At what point did the companion of Joan of Arc transform into the monster of Tiforges? Was it gradual corruption, or had darkness always existed beneath the heroic facade, waiting for opportunity and isolation to reveal itself? The testimony suggests calculation rather than madness. The systematic procurement, the equipped chambers, the efficient disposal, all point to organized methodology rather than spontaneous violence. If you had been among those who celebrated Gilles de as Marshal of France in 1429, would you have suspected what lay ahead? Or does evil of this magnitude always hide in plain sight until it's too late? The gallows at Prairie de la Madeleine gave justice its final word. But the castles at Tifoses and Machaul still stand, their stones holding memories that history cannot fully erase.